Good afternoon, everybody. I'm going to get started. Thanks for being here, for your time. My name is Jeremy Beaudry. I come from Montpelier, Vermont, which this is a photo not too far from my house. It's a lovely place to be. I've been there for about 10 years. Before that, I was in Philadelphia for many years. I work as a leader of a design and innovation team at the University of Vermont Health Network, which is a large health system that serves northern New York and most of central and northern Vermont as well. And again, I've been there about 10 years. With the exception of the Burlington metro area, which maybe tops out at about 100,000 people, the majority of our health network area is really rural, dealing with a sparsely populated part of New York and Vermont. So lots of challenges inherent in rural healthcare delivery. What I want to do this afternoon is just share some things I've learned over the past decade working as a designer in a very large health system, and encapsulated, distilled some initial thinking about this work of design in healthcare into a provocation that might make some of us designers feel a little bit uncomfortable and might even feel a little sacrilegious. And I'll talk through why that is perhaps. But when I think about the work we do within really complex systems as designers, I think what we need to do is expand the boundaries of design. And so my thesis here is that design is actually not enough. And what I want to do is describe my own evolution in thinking through this, and then present a kind of stance I think that we can take to really be equipped to solve some of the most challenging, complex systems problems that we're facing. Before I do that, I want to just get into a little bit of historical context, just to chart like how I think we got to this point. And I'm speaking about my own experience in a lot of ways. This is a really provocative question and answer snippet from a longer interview that the two kind of really well-known artists and industrial designers, Ray and Charles Eames, participated in. And as you can see, when asked the question of what are the boundaries of design, they respond, well, what are the boundaries of problems? And I think what's really interesting is that in some ways, this is from the late 60s, this particular exchange. In some ways, this sets the tone of design practice, the discipline for the next 50 or 60 years, because in its optimism, and you might even say it's hubris, it set the tone for, well, design can do anything. We can work on any type of problem. I mean, that's what design does. It looks at problems and it solves them. And so what I want to look at is maybe a little bit more detailed question of how we got to this point, and particularly for those working in healthcare or other kinds of complex systems, how is it that so many of us designers are working on these types of systems level problems, which seem somewhat distant from the casual observer from like conventional design problems that maybe are like graphic problems or object problems. A quick aside just regarding design in healthcare. This was from a report that the Equitable Healthcare Lab at IIT's Institute of Design put out last year, surveying the state of design in healthcare organizations. And so there's over, I think, 28 organizations that they listed and surveyed. They interviewed designers and leaders working at these organizations. And so you can see when it comes to design in healthcare, a lot of systems have mature, established design teams doing a range of different things, and they have different focuses. But it is a thing. It has momentum. It has had for the last 20 years or so. Now, so in the last half of the 20th century, as I noted, design started to do more and more things. Where once it began with more graphic types of problems, maybe more product-oriented problems, particularly when it comes to industrial design, there was an opportunity for designers to expand into more kind of manufacturing processes and systems, which then expanded into business processes and systems. Also within the industrial design realm, you had people thinking more about how things are used. So human factors comes along. And with the advent of more digitally focused consumer technologies, you're thinking about user interface design and user experience design. So design is increasing the scale of problems within what it's working on. The way in which design theorists have talked about this, I think, is helpful. So this is an idea about the four orders of design. It comes from two theorists, Richard Buchanan and Tony Goldsby-Smith, thinking about this expanding scope of problems that designers increasingly begin to address. So it begins with the first and second orders, text and image, objects. It then gets into more kind of process, strategy, experiences, and services. And then finally starting to look at the larger systems, the organizations, even the culture of which we are a part of. And they're all nested, they're all interconnected. But this describes the expansion of design practice. Additionally here, what you have happening is a lot of interest and kind of theorizing about systems thinking. And some of you may have some background in that. We've heard a lot about it actually already this morning, about the importance of system thinking. And an interesting thing comes out of that work, I think that's relevant, which is this idea of wicked problems, which comes from a kind of a planning theorist named Horst Riddle. And there's a list of 10 things you can look up to this that really accurately describe what is a wicked problem. It has a formulation, but essentially it's a kind of social system problem where information is confusing. There's lots of stakeholders. It's very messy. There's competing priorities, conflicting decision makers, and the ramifications through the system are really confusing, which for me, I mean, that's healthcare. That's the world I live in. And maybe for you, those of you in other industries, you can see that as well. So, how did designers get here? How did we take on the mantle of the hero in so many of these kind of really complex system spaces? Well, we've been asked to do this work. And I think it's because designers have an inherent kind of integrative way of thinking and approaching problems. So we're curious, we're voracious, we like to learn a lot of things. And at the same time, there was an interest in this thing, design thinking, which could really leverage some of the more conventional methods and tools of design and apply them to new contexts. So in the 90s and the aughts in particular, design thinking became a thing that it wasn't just for the formal aspects of problems, it became a thing that business leaders wanted. Design thinking was on the front page of business magazines. And increasingly you had MBA programs talking about design thinking, even bringing people in to teach design thinking. And so there was this sense that design had some kind of special power. And I think a lot of us designers in those early days, we were seeing this, we were a part of it. And there was a sense like, oh yeah, we can go into any problem space and we can use our tools and methods and we can solve these problems. I think I was also guilty of instilling this in others. From 2012 to 2015, I taught in a graduate design program. In that time, we were teaching the first wave of graduate students in human-centered design and design for social impact. And one of the things we were doing was trying to bolster the discipline of design. So we put them in situations, with nonprofit organizations, with healthcare organizations, and we said, go take your human-centered design tools and go solve these really important problems. And here's how you can talk about the value of design. And we tried to build a sense of disciplinary legitimacy in our design students. And so I incorporated that into my own thinking about we can do so much. I never talked about myself as a hero, but I think there was a little bit of that hubris in our positioning. Now, of course, we were always collaborative and we wanted to invite many people into the process, but it was always under the umbrella of design methods and design tools. It was our language that we were using to address these really complex problem spaces. I saw this in an article, a blog post about a year ago that really resonated with me in my experience as a designer building a design practice in a large healthcare organization. I'm just going to read it to make the point. So there's a rude awakening that design leaders often experience, so used to thinking of design as a self-evidently good thing. But it's true that many senior leadership don't care about design at all. They may even see it as a pointless waste of resources. But take a deep breath, it's not that bad. What they do care about is the impact and outcomes design can achieve. And I want to iterate that because in my experience, this is what's resonated with me in terms of bringing design to a non-design-led organization. So I'm pretty fortunate. I do work in a fairly supportive environment, and we were allowed to build our design practice within that kind of supportive environment. So I didn't have that rude awakening of being slapped in the face. But I take the point because as a designer, bringing in design methodology into a healthcare space, I quickly stopped talking about the kind of novelty and magic of all the design methods and tools that we had at our disposal and really began to message what we were doing a lot differently. It had to be focused on the outcomes and the impact we as a design team could make in the large healthcare organizations. So we started to talk about things around, improving patient and family experience. We talked about creating new clinical services, new business processes. We talked about ways we could make the organization more sustainable. And that started to resonate with our leaders and gave us a lot of runway to build what we were trying to build. The thing I want to pivot to now is when it comes to tackling the most pressing social systems types of problems, complex problems in our organizations, I'll go back to my point. Design is not enough. We need a different approach that is much more expansive, that can invite in a lot of different methods, a lot of different partners into our work. So what I'm proposing is something I'm calling a design plus approach, or a design plus methodological stance. And so what that could look like, it could be design plus change management. It could be design plus quality improvement methods and tools. It could be design plus system thinking. It could be design plus business planning. And the list goes on and on depending on your particular context, the types of problems you've been asked to work on. So to be more specific now, I want to just articulate what I mean by design plus. As I've said, for you and your organizations, what comes after the plus operator is going to look differently based on the kinds of work that you do. But I think what I can articulate is some more general principles about what I mean when I think about design plus. So the first point I want to make is about radical collaboration and earnest partnership. This one I think is fairly self-evident for those designers in the room, because I think it is built into our way of working. We seek to build empathy with others, so we do lots of research to understand different perspectives. I think many of us strive to do co-design or co-creation with stakeholders, so we invite them into a process. So that is a great place to start. What I want to emphasize here is that bringing in many minds, many different types of domain expertise, many different perspectives really helps us see problems more holistically, especially when you're dealing with a systems level type of problem. And it helps us source novel ideas as we're looking to solve those problems. I think the radical part here of radical collaboration is really opening up ourselves, designers, in our process to others in our organization, to admit that we don't have all the answers and that we really do need many different methods and tools and skills in order to tackle these types of problems. I think it also means leveraging and coordinating the resources within our organization that are there for a reason. They're there to improve the organization, to solve all sorts of problems that the organization is facing. And the last thing I'll point out is around language. So I think we need to use very clear, accessible language when we're talking about our work. I think we need to, when we can't use more accessible language, be very clear in the definitions of the terms that we're using, avoiding the jargon that we like to use in our design profession, and really adopting and inviting other approaches and processes in, and co-creating them with our partners. The second thing I want to point out here is about cross-training and methods and disciplines outside of design. This means really, being open and seeking out learning and other methodologies. And again, there are lots of different methodologies that are very appropriate to the problems we're working on. And so we can't learn all the things we need to learn, but we can start to skill up in those things that feel most relevant to the work we're doing. It might be getting certified in a goal-setting methodology like OKRs. It might mean beefing up your Lean Six Sigma or other quality improvement methods. It might mean getting some additional education in data analytics and visualization. There's any number of areas, other disciplines that you might start to skill up your team in to build in this cross-training. And from this, you can start to build a new set of tools and methods. And you can start to apply those and adapt those with this idea of expanding the boundaries of design. The last thing I want to talk about here with Design Plus is actually building multidisciplinary expertise into the structure of your design teams. And so this is about really changing the way that we're partnering and thinking about building design teams. It's including more diverse roles in our design teams. It might mean embedding project managers or QI folks, building in kind of key expert liaisons to other aspects of the organization. It might be putting data analysts and financial analysts on the team. In fact, it may be that the design team does not look like a design team so much anymore because you've got so many diverse roles in the team. It might mean that you're also changing job descriptions for designers. It may be that the role of the designer looks a little bit less conventional than it might look in another kind of more kind of design-centric organization. So again, the specific details of what this could look like in your organization will depend on your unique context, the problems that you're focused on. I think it's for us, in my experience, it was a very emergent kind of situation in that as we were asked to do different types of things, we went out and got the skills or borrowed the people we needed to do those things. And so what I'll do now is just give you a few more specific examples of what this has looked like in our organization. Because we're trying to be more effective. We're trying to reach those outcomes and impacts. So this one has been really important for us, is bringing in change management methods and tools to our work. And that's because so much of what we're trying to do is about navigating organizational dynamics, engaging really broad and diverse groups of stakeholders in the problems of healthcare. And really just most of the work is about relationship building. And what change management methods and tools do is they give you a really powerful framework to think about how people experience change, the transitions that they might go through when encountering difficult changes in an organization. It also gives you a way to understand power and attitudes and interest when you need to move people towards common purpose and solutions of these really complex problems. It's helpful in designing governance structures and operational structures as well. And so as a fairly immature health system, and maybe my leaders wouldn't like me saying that, we're just about 12 years old. It's 7 different organizations that were brought together under the Health Network umbrella. We're still quite immature when it comes to being an integrated system. And a lot of our work, specifically in the last 3 years, has been about becoming more of a system that functions in a coherent way, a more coordinated way. And so everything we're doing is touching on that systemness piece, and change management is a thing that we really lean heavily on. So we've incorporated a lot of those methods and tools. We do have some change management expertise in our organization. It's like 2 people in an organization of 18,000, so we can't rely on them. We seek, input and advice from them, but we've really had to learn from them to incorporate some of these tools. The next thing I'll talk about here is just a whole range of thinking and tools and methods from the strategy world. We saw a lot of opportunity in this space for our team to move into. We do have a kind of a strategic planning department. They're really focused on business planning, though. They figure out how to operationalize, once we have the objectives in place. What we've had to do is really get into the weeds of strategy around what is our vision as an organization or a team within the organization? What are our values? What are the guiding principles that we can lean on to help realize our vision? And then what are the goals and the metrics we're going to use to move towards that vision and track our progress? So we've really done a lot of work in this space to create some service offerings that bring teams in, help them define vision, help them set really clear objectives and key results. We are using the OKR methodology in our organization. And so we had to get certified in that as a design team. And then how do we prioritize the various tactics that we're going to use to meet those objectives? So that work looks a lot like just straight up strategy and strategic planning. The interesting piece, though, is because we bring a design perspective, the way that we approach it is much more collaborative, it's much more research informed, and it's co-created. So a lot more people are involved in those strategic kind of conversations. The last thing I'll talk about here specifically with my organization is just the move into more portfolio and project management. And I think I resisted this one for a long time. I think I had some biases against project managers. That's probably just my own experience with project management. And I didn't quite understand the value until we were handed a portfolio of about 36 strategic projects, which is too many projects to put strategic on, by the way. And we had to coordinate how to execute all this work. That's when we knew we needed project managers. So in the last 9 months, we were able to borrow and steal a handful of project managers and bring them into our design team. And from them, we've learned a ton because they had the expertise to coordinate and organize work to get from, hey, this is what we need to do, to executing and completion, and also monitoring the progress of that work. So now some of our designers are actually getting certified in project management. We're building a new process to drive strategy to execution, and it largely uses a project management framework where we're bringing in and integrating it with kind of design process so it makes sense for our overall philosophy. But this has been really important in terms of holding and driving strategic work to execution and completion. All right, I am moving towards the completion and I'm looking forward to some questions and conversation. Oh, this is for me to take a breath. This is a poppy in my front yard, which is one of my favorite flowers. Okay, thanks, that's perfect. Okay, yeah, so I'm just gonna close out with a couple of thoughts and then we can chat. So as I think through what I've learned and trying to put some definition around this the design plus approach, it's really, I think the call to action here is, well, let's expand our disciplinary boundaries as designers, as a design team. Let's expand the web of relationships so that we can meet the needs of the organizations and communities that we're working in, which means we can have more of a meaningful impact. My question back to you in thinking through this is, well, what would it look like for you and your team to create a design plus organization? And as I keep reiterating, it's going to be different than what it looks like for me and my organization. It's going to be, dependent on a whole host of variables. But you might think about, what does that do? What does that mean for the structure of your team? What does that mean for who you hire? What does it mean for the kinds of partnerships that you haven't yet formed in your organization? How do you start to skill up, train up people? How do you invite new people onto your teams? I think in closing, I want to just tie in the design for dignity piece here a little bit more clearly. One of the intrinsic values I believe within human-centered design is that we do seek to understand many people's experiences. We do attempt to build empathy so the things that we're doing in our work meet actual needs, meet people where they are, which I think we heard a lot about this morning in some of the work from earlier. I think if we can pair that with these other methodologies, these other partners and collaborators, colleagues in our organizations, we also amplify the dignity we see in them because we bring them in as more equal collaborators. And we leave some of the heroism that I was talking about earlier behind and have a more collaborative approach to addressing these really wicked problems, these complex systems problems. Thank you so much for your time. I appreciate it. And I'd love to hear any questions, and maybe there's something I missed that we need to discuss. Yeah.
For instance, I also work in a hospital system, and we're just to start to build a new innovation team, and design is a core component of it. So we're about over 100 years in history. There's so many inventions and research that happen already, but there's no, I want to say there's no standardized way of innovation, and we don't have really a system to take an idea through the proper process and to make it happen. Everybody has their own method. How did you navigate starting that in your organization? I love that you mentioned plus strategy, because I think we're also in a conversation of what does strategy team do, and what is innovation team supposed to do? How do we not step on other people's toes? But when you mention collaboration, how do you make sure that all these teams are working together instead of having the conversation of, oh, let's not do what other people are already doing?
Yeah, I mean, I do think it's still a work in progress, so we haven't figured it out completely. A lot of it was trial by error. So when I started, we were very small. We're still fairly small. But we were just looking for any opportunity to showcase what human-centered design looks like in a healthcare organization. So it was a very bottom-up approach. So we would go find a project, in our children's specialty center, or we would go work with some of our learning and development folks to find out an employee experience thing. What the failure was in that is we didn't have connections to the strategy of the organization, and we didn't often have executive sponsorship. So we would do great work, but when it came to implementation or execution, making it sustainable, it just wouldn't go anywhere. Along the way, though, we formed a lot of really important relationships with our senior leaders in the organization. And we could use those projects, even though they weren't necessarily successful in terms of the objective, we could use them as a demonstration of what is possible when you use the methods of human-centered design to work on these kinds of problems. And as well, emerging is really the word for me today, because we formed relationships with our organizational development people. We formed new relationships with IT, even some quality folks. So along the way, we started to figure out the turf stuff so that we know who to talk to, we know who to sync up with. So it wasn't necessarily an intentional strategy from the beginning, but along the way, we navigated the kind of idiosyncrasies of our organization to figure out how to be successful.
Can I ask a follow-up question?
Yeah.
Did you have a system kind of training method to help them understand what your team do?
We attempted that. It was on its way, and then COVID came, and everything got wiped off the table. So we don't have that.
I'm just curious, because it seems like many health systems are now in budget crunches, and the first thing to go, to trim the fat, so to speak, is exactly these kinds of things that are so important. And maybe it's more cultural. But how do you make a business case for starting a design team? Because we've had a couple. We've had some design contractors. We've had a digital collab with someone who's trained in design. And honestly, because I don't think the hospital leadership understood or were interested in it, they were really just smoke screens, to be honest. And then it obviously didn't work, and now they're all gone. So I'm just curious how you make the business case at the highest levels.
Yeah. One is we had some senior leader champions who believed in us and gave us a lot of leeway, and gave us some grace to figure it out as we went. Now, some of that was just, well, I trust you and I trust what you're doing, so go do it. Other senior champions had to be brought along because they experienced the work with us and they saw for themselves what the impact could be. We have converted skeptics of design through working with them and elbow to elbow working. Not just going in and making presentations, but hey, you're gonna come spend a day with us in this particular strategy workshop, and we're gonna get into the weeds. And I have to say that kind of activation for people can help. It doesn't get to the business case question. I think where we've tried to position ourselves over the last several years is directly tied to any strategic priority. So if we can get connected to a project that is on the strategic plan, and we know our lane, we know what our role is, and we have a good partnership, we can help drive that strategic project to execution. And then it may not still be able to quantify the value of design, but you can point to, well, design was involved and contributed X, Y, and Z, and look at the outcome here of this project. That's a really hard question.
We have time for one more question, and we need to transition
Okay.
to the next speaker.
I was just going to say, I feel like what you described is almost like my career trajectory, is like going through each one of those, like maybe human-centered change management, maybe like design applied to strategy. And I've sort of been around all of those, and I'm now in a design function where we do bring in a lot of those things. And I think my question is, having seen a lot of that, having seen a lot of different ways to be successful, and I would say in some ways it's less about design than designers, right? I think you can make the business case for the designers doing that work, and because we're the ones who are so good at that collaboration, and even to your point, are so good at the training by experience, not by classroom. I can work elbow to elbow with me. You will learn by doing, and I will show you, you sort of said like demonstration projects, and not so much about governance, but more about iterating your way to get to that. So here's my question then, is with all that in mind, the more you bring in all those other disciplines, how do you keep designers from getting lost? From everything else that is more familiar to the rest of the business? The change management, the systems thinking, the total quality improvement, all that. How do you keep that from just getting swallowed up? Because I think designers have always been in a very defensive position.
Yeah, that's a great question, and it's something that I wrestle with as we're trying to build this somewhat new process that maybe looks more like a project management process. What we've done, I think, is really mark clearly where the value of our designers lives in that. So it's really, a lot of it is at the kind of discovery and design stage of that kind of project management cycle. So we have clarity about where designers go in and do research. We have clarity about how we help people define problems, brainstorm early solutions, the ideation activities that we like to do. Where it's getting a little more fuzzy is the iterative part. So once you get into like, okay, we're on the path, we're doing the thing, we're still trying to figure out the details of how do you like build an iterative sequence so designers can do that part of their work as well, which is evaluate things and like take it back and kick it around and evaluate and keep going. So I think I'm aware of that issue. I think the process we've mapped out now, I think it's making our designers feel settled and comfortable about their role. But I think we have to run through it a few iterations to see if that's effective. Yeah. Okay, thanks so much. I really appreciate it.